The Animus and the Anima. Oh boy, here we go. So, this is one of the most challenging concepts in Jungian psychology. It is, I think, at base, fairly simple, really, but it gets entwined with Jung's personal history. Now, to his credit, Jung did say every psychology, even mine, has the character of a personal confession. But nowhere is that more true than in the concept of the animus and the anima. It's very easy to get lost in amplifications and the romantic language that he uses. And as the great Anthony Stevens says, don't get fascinated by the image. Now, what he meant by that it was this tendency that you can see, is particularly in pop culture depictions of Jungian psychology. You can get lost in the fact that those images are very rich for the animus, the anima, and all the gods and goddesses and all that kind of stuff. But that really, if we're going to apply this to psychology, we need to look beyond that. So I'm going to go over some of the basics of this concept for you, and then give you some resources that you can take a look at if you want to learn more about it. The animus and the anima are at root a relating function. And I think he really would have done better calling it something else rather than gendering it the way that he did, because it then got caught up in a lot of his own personal psychology. But here we are. At the heart of it is a function that connects us outside of ourselves. It's something that draws us out of our comfort zone, for better or for worse. And the imagery that we see used to depict this inner process is often going to be a sexually charged other, because that is something that would definitely draw us out of our comfort zone because of how intense our sex drive is. So, when we're talking about the animus or the anima in imagery in dreams, that's normally what we're talking about. We're talking about something that presents itself like that, as a alluring figure, or potentially someone leading you down into the path of destruction, say, on one hand. But it doesn't have to be that. And in order for us to get at the root of this, we want to acknowledge the imagery, right? Stick to the imagery and try to make sure that we understand what it is representing. But the fact of the matter is that what we're really after is the thing that it's representing, and not the image itself. We don't want to get too bound up in that. And it's very easy to do with the animus and the anima, unfortunately. So I've got 3 do nots, and I've got 3 do's when it comes to making sense of the anima or the animus. Number 1, do not project this image onto someone else and then chase after them. And this is something that unfortunately will happen. It's a natural genomic response to say, my relatedness is as if it's this person, right? It's just the standard dream hack stuff that I talk about all the time. It's very common in all kinds of different psychodynamic schools. Now, what I'm warning against, and what Jung himself warned against, ironically, is taking this imagery, and then if you happen to see someone else who seems to embody that, you chase after them in so-called real life. And Jung said this leads you to a terrible business, which is really funny, because he did exactly that in his life. And I'm saying don't do that. Okay. Jung had his problems. He wasn't perfect, and this is one of them. He definitely got this messed up. Number 2, do not get caught up in the imagery of the anima and the animus and forget about what it's supposed to be doing. It's very easy to do this. You get gobsmacked by a really potent image, some kind of god or goddess-like figure. You can get lost in fantasies about it, and that's a dead end. Okay, it's supposed to be pulling you out of your safety zone and your little bubble, right? If you happen to be like that, you'll get these powerful images here, because this instinct is saying you need to go out there and connect, right? And it's not just connecting sexually, it's connecting in general. This is a biopsychosocial reality that it is representing. That's number 2. Number 3 is don't underestimate the power of the animus or the anima. And by that, I mean, you, the ego, need to be cautious that we're dealing with very potent forces here. There are strong, raw, instinctive forces that will pull you into various relationships and entanglements you want to be cautious in this regard. And the best way to do that, of course, is to work through this sort of thing with a therapist, obviously. But again, we just need to recognize that the animus and the anima are there to connect us to others at the most fundamental biopsychosocial level. It has tremendous instinctual panception affective power. Okay. The representation of the animus, your animus or anima, will tell the story because it is a type of complex. In IPSA terminology, we call this a deep structure complex versus a Janaean complex, which is one that splits off of the ego as a result of trauma. This one is more innately derived. Nevertheless, one can contaminate the other. And this is an observation that is well made in IPSA, but it's also, I've seen the same kind of observation made elsewhere within Jungian psychology. What does that mean is your own sort of experience of trauma and your own attachment challenges can blend in with the anima or the animus, and then you'll be even more entangled. So just be aware of this and make sure you do the work of untangling all of this stuff. So what about the 3 do's? The first do is to go past the image with your therapist or trusted other, or whoever it is that you're working on this with. What I mean by that is, yes, the imagery is great and wonderful, but what is it after? What is it actually representing? That's what we need to know. So you're going to have to go beyond that and not just get caught up in how amazing or beautiful or dangerous or scary it is. Jung did this in the Red Book, and I think it's really, really distracting. It can be very distracting. Again, Anthony Stevens has warned against this. Steve Richards has warned against this. These are smart people, okay? I'm warning against this, right? Number 2, do learn more about it. There's a lot of great contemporary sources on this, one of Jung's most challenging concepts, and I'll talk about some of those down at the end. And then 3, recognize how early events in your life can play into your relating function. Early experiences of trauma, neglect, and abuse can influence the way that the animus and the anima present themselves. Because like I said before, that stuff can kind of entangle or even contaminate this function that is designed to get you out of your shell, to help you to balance yourself out with the help of others, whether that be an intimate partner or anything along the biopsychosocial scale. Attachment theory studies is one aspect of this that are very useful to think about. There are secure, avoidant, and disorganized types of attachments, and those can influence the way that this function presents itself to you in the form of dreams or fantasy images. And when I say fantasy, I mean like reverie or spontaneous thoughts. So that's another thing you want to do. The caveat to this, or the corollary, I would say, is that be extremely cautious of how this function can contaminate the analytic field. What I mean by that is if you're in therapy or if you are a therapist, you may have already heard this 100 times, but I'm going to say it again. This can contaminate the analyst and analysand relationship. It can affect, i.e., the transference. It can insinuate its way in there, okay? And you've got to keep your eyes open for that. In my analysis of Beowulf, which I have written a book about, and I've also got several videos on my channel about in a series, I discuss the brilliant way that the poem depicts several ways in which the anima can appear. Unfortunately, it's from a male point of view, so I don't have an equally interesting dissection of the animus, which I'm not a huge fan of that, but here we are. Anyway, I think you can make analogies there, but in other words, the important thing is to recognize that it can appear in many different ways, and those different ways will have different meanings for you. You don't want to get distracted by too much amplification and fantasy and all of that kind of stuff, right? Keep it real. Stick to the imagery and do your homework, okay? Because we're playing with dynamite here when we're talking about this. It really can lead you to a terrible business, as Jung found out, and not only in his patients' lives, but in his own life. For a much deeper dive on this subject, I would strongly recommend going to the Young to Live By channel. They just finished a 6.5-hour smorgasbord of excellent information on this very subject. So do yourself a favor and go check that out. You won't regret it. Remember, you get out of it what you put into it. Okay, so yes, it's long, but it's worth it. So that's what I have for you today on Mental Health Mondays. Click the like button, subscribe, go to ericgoodwyn.com, and be sure to sign up for my newsletter. There's lots of cool stuff to come, including a podcast that I recently did. So that's what I got for you today. Catch you next time.